Will Wagner outlive its founder? Russian authorities Sunday confirming the death of Yevgeny Prigozhin and his number two. This in the downing of their private jet on a flight to his native St Petersburg. We'll ask about what the circumstances of the downing of the plane. It happened on the 2-month anniversary of his aborted march on Moscow and the thousands of irregulars on 3 continents that still answer to his private military company. And we'll also ask what the fall of a figurehead who for long tried to offer plausible deniability for mercenary activity and troll farming tells about the Kremlin's mindset today and its options as the war in Ukraine enters a new phase. Does Vladimir Putin still need Wagner-type outfits? Part of the legacy of Yevgeny Prigozhin on display in weekend demonstrations in Niger, where supporters of a recent coup waved Russian flags as they shouted slogans against former colonial power France. Who now to spin Moscow's message? Today in the France 24 debate, what happens after Prigozhin? And joining us from Vilnius, Lilia Yaparova, reporter for the investigative news website Meduza. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
We also want to welcome former French ambassador to Moscow, Claude Blanche-Maison. Good evening. Good to see you. Good to welcome as well former KGB officer Sergei Chernov. Your latest book is in French. It's called The Escalation, and it has the subtitle, Is He Really Mad? With a picture of Vladimir Putin.
Yeah, it's my book. It's a title, and he's very mad.
Okay.
Really mad.
There's a spoiler for you. Anastasia Shaposhkina, political scientist, president of the Eastern Circles think tank group. Welcome back to the show.
Thank you.
The France 24 debate, where you can join the conversation you have on Facebook and Twitter. The hashtag is F24debate. When confirmation came on Sunday, Western journalists in Moscow flocked to see the several hundred gathered at a makeshift memorial in the Russian capital. Some there openly expressing their admiration for Yevgeny Prigozhin, seen not as a gangster or war criminal, but a leader who stood up for his men. Inko Yatate has more.
For days, speculation has lingered over the fate of Yevgeny Prigozhin after the Wagner chief was suspected to have died in a plane crash last Wednesday. On Sunday, the country's investigative committee brought an end to the mystery. It confirmed that genetic tests showed Prigozhin was among the 10 victims.
В рамках уголовного дела о крушении самолета в Тверской области завершено проведение молекулярно-генетических экспертиз. По их результатам личности всех 10 погибших установлены. Они соответствуют списку, заявленному в полетном листе.
Along with Prigozhin, the Wagner chief's right-hand man, Dmitry Urkin, was also among those on board the plane, which was heading to St Petersburg. No information has been given as to what may have caused the crash. It comes just 2 months after Prigozhin led a short-lived mutiny against Russia's top military brass. Since Wednesday, people have been paying tribute to the mercenary leader at makeshift memorials. While some Russians regard him as a controversial figure, others see Prigozhin as a war hero.
Каждый день мы надеялись на то, что это не случилось. Мы с этим человеком связывали достаточно много надежд, потому что это человек конкретный, смелый. Мы хотим правды, понять, кто все-таки стоит за этим.
Prigozhin's death has raised questions about the future of the Wagner Group.
И я думаю, Евгений Пригожин тоже наверняка такую ситуацию предвидел, и я думаю, то, что у него есть, точно влияет. И во всяком случае, я думаю, Вагнера не будут отставать от своих принципов и будут дальше идти.
Since Friday, thousands of Wagner mercenaries have been forced to swear an oath of allegiance to Russia, perhaps a step towards their integration into the Russian army.
Lily Yaparova, first of all, your reaction to that woman we saw in that report saying expressing her admiration for Yevgeny Prigozhin and what this moment means.
Well, it's sad to see that, really, because I consider Yevgeny Prigozhin to be a murderer, first and foremost. I still vividly remember August of 2018, when we in Moscow learned that 3 of our colleagues, the Russian journalists, one of them a teacher of mine, were killed in the Central African Republic, presumably by the Wagner mercenaries. Obviously, now that both the Wagner Dmitry Rutkin himself and Yevgeny Prigozhin are dead. Now we have less opportunities than ever to ever learn the truth about these killings. But the amount of sympathy that Yevgeny Prigozhin now, this amount of sympathy we saw this woman just asked in the street to show Prigozhin doesn't deserve it. He's not controversial. He's evil.
What has Medusa learned, if anything, more about what exactly happened last Wednesday?
At first, we were surprised to learn from our sources inside the Yevgeny Prigozhin's empire that there was actually no protocol for him or for his top brass, for the Wagner Group's management, to not fly together in groups. So there was actually no protocol on that. Also, we learned that he was trying to save money in the past months, in the months after his failed coup. He was trying to save money, and he also tried to save money on his own security detail. It was very unexpected, and I'd say it was a bold move. Also, it was surprising to learn that most of the mercenaries we talked about, both younger and more experienced members of this private military company, weren't in the least surprised that he ended up being killed. One of the guys outright told me that, well, after the coup, we kind of saw that he was a dead man walking, because our president, and I'm quoting now this young mercenary, our president just doesn't forgive these kind of things.
That doesn't forgive this kind of thing. Sergei Jernov, so did we make too much of Wagner's power before? When you hear the demise of it and the way it's sort of floundered after that aborted march on Moscow?
I think so, yeah. It's a group, it's a so-called private group. You said the deniability. Putin said, I financed during 10 years Wagner from the budget of the Russian Federation. There is no Prigozhin as head of Wagner Group. The head of Wagner Group is Putin and Russian Federation. And Putin said it publicly before, in front of the cameras. That's why I think that we constructed a myth about Wagner Group.
Who's we?
Also,
who's the we that constructed the myth?
Yeah.
Is it us here?
Everybody. Also about the influence of Wagner Group and of Putin in Africa. You take commerce between Russia and Africa, 54 countries. It's only 18 billion. 18 billion. China is 300 billion. European Union, it's 400 billion of dollars or euros, I don't know. But you know, with 18 billion, Putin does everything in Africa. It's just impossible.
So the Russians were boxing above their weight category with Wagner?
Well, I think in Africa they were most interested by their political influence and also by putting a hand on the mines. So that was a new kind of colonial pact. Prigozhin was procuring security to the leaders,
dictators.
Well, dictators, if you want, and the return was he had his hand on different mines resources, and it was a very profitable business. So profitable that after all, what had happened after the mutiny and the almost 2 months before his disappearance, he was in fact in Africa again. He was traced in Central Africa, where he met with number one, with the leader, and then he was in Mali, where he also met with the military people, with the junta, and he was mostly interested by keeping this business and keeping control of this business, and then he went back to Russia. So I think he was mostly interested himself by the money, by the returns coming from this pact, and he was providing a service, a security service to the dictators.
A security service to dictators, but I guess others are moving into that. A couple of points here to ponder. First of all, as we heard Lilia Yaparova say at the beginning, Anastasia Shapochkina, no protocol. Him and his number two on the same plane. Was that the first thing that went through your mind last Wednesday?
Definitely, I was wondering, at first Utkin's name was not announced, who were the other 9 people on the plane? That was my first question. Now, knowing that it was Dmitry Utkin, of course, was much more interesting than knowing that it was Yevgeny Prigozhin. As Yulia said, that most of the analysts considered Prigozhin dead, not just within Wagner, people who worked for Wagner, but also analysts of Russia sitting in or outside Russia or in other countries. And it was just a matter of time. Of course, this crash proves again that Putin doesn't forgive traitors. It also shows that Prigozhin himself, again, and as you just mentioned, right, was not possibly he was not a typical member of the elites, and there's certain mistakes that Putin forgives, many mistakes to the elites. But he, first of all, wasn't part of the traditional elites, and then second, there are mistakes he doesn't forgive.
So why not in that case have him put away when he came back to Russia shortly after the aborted march?
This is exactly the question everybody's asking. There were several hypotheses, like, Prigozhin has huge compromise on Putin. Maybe Putin is afraid of the reaction of the Russian population. There are several thousands that follow Prigozhin. How are they going to react? Well, obviously, we saw there's no reaction of the Russian population. We really can no longer talk about the Russian society. We can only talk about the Russian, indeed, population, which doesn't at all react to anything. And then Prigozhin's popularity was just, as we just mentioned, created by the media, and that's pretty much that shows that this was true. More important was the death of Utkin, who has legitimacy of being considered one of the founders, one of the people at least at the founding of Wagner, because he is one of the former special services members, unlike Prigozhin, who is a former prisoner and nothing else. So then this indicates to us what can be maybe the future of other leaders of Wagner, those who are just operational leaders. And the removal also in parallel of Surovikin, who was one of Prigozhin's supporters.
This is the head of the Air Force now, so-called General Armageddon, Alexander Surovikin, who is removed from his post on the day of the same day.
And that, of course, sends a powerful signal to everybody else around Prigozhin. And there were people who were backing him, who were backing Wagner at large. And also the death of Utkin at the same time sends a signal to the security services who were behind Wagner, because behind Wagner was the Kremlin, but also GRU and others, and other people from security services.
Again, why wait 2 months?
Because during three weeks after the putsch, Putin couldn't do anything.
Couldn't do anything?
No, because Wagner Group was armed. There were 12,000 armed men with tanks, with artillery, and it was impossible, just impossible. And if you remember, they were disarmed on the 20th of July. And after that, they closed Molkino, the base of Wagner in Krasnodar region. They closed some camps in Donetsk and Lugansk. And after that, only after that, Putin began to do also the removal of the finances of Wagner to his people, to replace Prigozhin and Prigozhin's
How come Prigozhin didn't see all this coming?
Because he's human. You must laugh. He's human, and human beings make mistakes.
Is that how you read Lilia Yaparova?
sources close to Yevgeny Prigozhin told me that he was basically just drunk with power.
Yeah.
Also, back in the end of June, when Vladimir Putin asked Yevgeny Prigozhin and his commanding officers to come to the Kremlin, and they had this talk, serious talk, and a source close to these commanders basically told me that Putin was shouting at this group of people from the Wagner group, and the idea that Prigozhin being shouted at by Vladimir Putin himself probably believed for a moment that that was all the punishment he's going to receive, and obviously he was extremely his behavior was extremely unsafe. Most of the mercenaries whom I talked to believe that his demise is his own fault, because they told me that he should have stayed away in Belarus, in Venezuela, in anywhere but flying over Russian territory. It's really strange. His decisions in these past months are really strange.
After the aborted march on Moscow 2 months ago, thousands of Wagner fighters were indeed offered space to camp in neighboring Belarus, as you say. Belarus, whose leader last Friday had his take on who did not kill Yevgeny Prigozhin.
I can't say who did it. I won't play the lawyer, even of my older brother. I know Vladimir Putin. He's prudent, very calm, and even slow in making decisions on other less complex issues. Therefore, I cannot imagine that Putin did it.
Now, according to the French newspaper Le Monde, there are still thousands of Wagner fighters in Belarus, and that has neighbors worried. They are raising alarm bells. There was a meeting of interior ministers from the Baltic states in Warsaw this Monday.
If it comes to a critical incident, regardless of whether it's at the Polish, Lithuanian or Latvian border, we will retaliate immediately. All border crossings presently open will be closed.
So, without Putin's support, obviously, these Wagner fighters that are in Belarus, do they represent a threat of any sort?
Well, I mean, the Wagner fighters were in Belarus because, some of them were in Belarus because it was part of the agreement just after the coup. And so I think Lukashenko was smart enough to organize that kind of arrangement, but thereafter he was a little bit afraid of these Wagner fighters. And when he said to Putin, well, some of your people from Wagner want to go for shopping in Warsaw, so you should took care of them. And in fact, I think Lukashenko was a little bit afraid of them at the very end. But there was no chance that those Wagner people would fight against Poland. I mean, there is no way that anybody.
So why is the Polish interior minister saying
because
all this?
he's playing his part. In fact, Poland, of course, it is very logic that Poland is afraid of what's happening in Belarus and for the future. But first, they have elections in a few months' time, and second, they perfectly know that Russia will never attack them because they are part of NATO, and no way that Russia would attack Poland or would attack the Baltic states because they are part of NATO, and Putin doesn't want any war with NATO. He wants to remain in power. That's why it took 2 months to solve the Prigozhin issue, because between the coup and between the disappearance of Prigozhin, after all, Putin was very clever to find out who has been faithful to him, who has been hesitant, who could be in the next coup or something like that. And that took some time, of course, to sort out whether in the military, whether in the intelligence service, military or civil intelligence service, and whether with the governor, who was supporting him, who was not supporting him, who was loyal to him, who was not loyal to him. And finally, I think, of course, he had to kill one way or another Prigozhin. Of course, he will say Kremlin has nothing to do with this accident.
He said it.
But it took to him 24 hours to write the speech he made on the TV that finally Prigozhin, it was a kind of eulogy of
Yeah, he called him a talented businessman who made a few mistakes.
And a friend of him for a long time, but he made very, very big mistake. So that was one stage. And then the next stage will be the funerals. The funerals are going to be organized probably on a very visible, very manner with Patriarch Kirill, because Putin wants to evacuate the political, of course, political drama around Prigozhin, and he has to organize big, large funerals. That will happen in a few days. And then the next thing, maybe before funerals, would be the conclusions of the inquiry commission. And of course, the conclusion of the inquiry commission are also written by Kremlin. So they have a lot of homework to do to finish with that. And of course, as you said, during those 2 months, they also tried to sort out how was the conglomerate Wagner was working exactly, because it's very complicated. And once they sort out to disconnect the different things and to organize, especially the connection between the Africa business with GRU, the military intelligence, and GRU wants to be in charge of this African business.
I want to get to the GRU and its role in Africa forthcoming in a moment. Just very briefly on this point, Lilia Yaparova, you hear Ambassador Blanche Maison there talking about the prospect of big funerals with the head of the Orthodox Church. Is that what's going to happen, or will they be treated as traitors?
I actually heard that the funeral ceremonies will be very quiet. I think that the relatives and the people close to the Wagner group, they've been, they already understand, they've been prohibited basically from organizing any kind of mass protest or pompous ceremony around these two men, Yevgeny Prigozhin and Dmitry Utkin. So I think it will be quiet, pretty quiet.
I think also. Because there is another thing. People are making now icons of Prigozhin, and Orthodox Church doesn't like that. It's Orthodox Church to do the saints, and Prigozhin is not a saint. And I think they will be perhaps organizing his funeral perhaps in Lugansk, because he is hero of Lugansk and hero of Donetsk, and that is on the territory of war, and that's why there will be no one except the family.
How freewheeling, Anastasia Shapachkina, is the chatter on the social medium Telegram when it comes to all this?
Yeah, so this is something actually to watch, is what is going to happen to all of the mill bloggers, and because they have been already ruled in by the Kremlin on several occasions, and the chatter has been ruled in.
Yeah, these military bloggers who've been very vocal in covering the war in Ukraine.
Up until a certain moment, up until we can say maybe around the mobilization, the first mobilization wave in September last year, when after that they've been quieter, and then a little bit more quiet, and then a little bit more supportive of the Kremlin. And this is something that, of course, is to see what is, to me, the interesting question is what is going to be pretty much the spectrum of oppression. Of course, military bloggers, interesting, but always controllable, always possible to rule in. More interesting is to see who else is going to fall after the death of Prigozhin. Some actors that we have already named have been taken out, but some others who are very close to Putin, who are really real part of the Russian elites who have supported Prigozhin for years and been also part of the medium between Prigozhin and Putin, because Prigozhin hasn't always personally met with Putin, but a lot through the intermediaries who are closer to Putin. And this is interesting. One thing to watch is what is going to happen within the Russian
Who are these
elites.
intermediaries?
I'm thinking especially about Kovalchuk brothers, but
Who are these oligarchs?
oligarchs are very close to Putin.
Yuri Kovalchuk.
Yes, Yuri
Precisely,
Kovalchuk.
yeah.
Thank you very much. Yes, indeed, about this one particular Kovalchuk, who actually has been so close to Putin. They spent COVID together, and he has been one of the. Prigozhin was kind of considered to be Kovalchuk's protege. Then Sechin was one of the supporters of Prigozhin, apparently as well. And then another thing is to watch is one is what's going to happen to those who supported him, and the other is among whom the wealth is going to be redistributed. That's the most important question for the.
So from places like the gold mines in Sudan and this sort of.
Absolutely, and the things in Syria, things in Sudan, things in Libya. So all of the countries, Mozambique, where Wagner has been present. So what is going to apparently Ukraine most likely will be close to those cash flows are going to be given to or have been given to other people, but the rest of the world is open. And there is to watch what is going to be the future of Wagner. Is it going to be just dissipated, become a shell company, and being integrated into its former rivals / partners, or is it just going to have new leadership of marionettes, and therefore the brand will be preserved, the core competence, expertise will be preserved, the people, but the management will change.
All right, let's ask about that, because our panel discussing how over the last 2 months there's been a kind of consolidation on the part of the Kremlin. The Wall Street Journal last Friday reporting how when African leaders went to St Petersburg last month for a summit, they met not with Prigozhin, but with General Andrei Aviranov, the head of the military intelligence GRU's Covert Offensive Operations Unit. Last week, as Prigozhin was wrapping up what would be his final tour of the continent, Moscow had dispatched Yunus Bek Yevkurov, who you see here in Tripoli, the deputy defense minister, to send the signal that all the old dealings with Wagner henceforth would be formal state-to-state ties. So I ask you the question, Sergei Girnov, will they need irregulars, or will it now, since everything's out in the open, will it just be with the Russian state?
I think that Wagner is done. I don't think they will keep Wagner even as a trademark, because Yevkurov said in Libya that now it's a Russian state that comes to replace Wagner's, because after Putin's declaration that that was Russian Federation who financed Wagner's, it's no need to have Wagner's. But he said we have another company, Redut, with the Ministry of Defense, and I think that they will took GRU, the military intelligence will remain. That is true for sure.
Okay, let me ask you.
Yeah?
Yevkurov, he's not just anybody. He was the man who Prigozhin had this testy standoff with on that in Rostov.
Exactly.
So, and he's spoken to in the informal thou that you use in Russian like you do in French, rather than the formal you, and it shocked a lot of people. Is he damaged goods as well?
Yeah, he's damaged, but he had done nothing against Putin. He just sat with Prigozhin, and that's why Putin did nothing to Yevkurov and continued to use him. But Alexeyev, he was the first deputy to director of the GRU. He disappeared.
He's disappeared. What do you do if you're the Libyans, Claude Blanche-Maison? You see, again, this change of caste. Does it bother you, or you just think, oh, it doesn't matter, as long as the weapons and the money keep coming?
I think on the short run, Putin is reinforced by what has happened in the last 2 months. He is rather reinforced because he has managed to find out who was disloyal. And finally, with the death of Prigozhin, he sent a message to all the elite people: if you betray, if you become a traitor, you will be destroyed. And of course, he said, well, Peskov has been saying Kremlin has nothing to do with that accident. and Putin is will do the same. We have nothing to do with the accident. Doing that, you understand me, you know? I have nothing to do with this accident. And everybody has understood anyway, and most of the elite people know exactly what has happened. Whatever it was, a bomb or a missile, doesn't matter anyway. It has been a Kremlin operation ordered by Putin to send a clear message. If you betray, you will be killed.
And of course, Lily Yaparova, Yevgeny Prigozhin wasn't just about private military companies and bartering for raw materials in far-flung places. He also ran that troll farm that was uncovered after the 2016 election in the United States. Is that something that you can just hand over to somebody else?
It's been already handed over to some people. For example, analysts following the activities of this infamous troll farm noticed that right after the Prigozhin's sudden demise, the same boats which were previously promoting Prigozhin's agenda started promoting Kremlin's agenda, muddling the water, saying that we don't know yet if Prigozhin was killed. And I've already heard that, Prigozhin indeed has had many information operations in different parts of the world, not just in Russia and in Africa. And I've already heard that some of his Eastern European networks are going into the hands of other people.
Going into the hands of other people. But it's also who the interlocutors are. There are milli bloggers that you were talking about, but there's a lot of bloggers on the African continent who have a relationship, who had a relationship with the Wagner group. Is the same thing as you can just, this is your new interlocutor?
Yes. First of all these African interlocutors and authorities and different military figures, they all had a relationship with the Russian state, with the Kremlin, first and foremost, and then Yevgeny Prigozhin. As a source inside Russia's Ministry of Defense told me right after the coup happened, we're going to annihilate the Wagner group in Africa. We're going to replace these guys with some other people. We have people to replace the Wagner group in Africa. And as my colleagues from great outlet iStories reported in the past several months, there's been two private military companies, one called Convoy and the other called Redoute. Sergei already mentioned it. That has already, before Prigozhin died, have started to replace the Wagnerites on the continent.
And closer to home, the day Prigozhin's plane went down was also the 18th month anniversary of Vladimir Putin's all-out invasion of Ukraine. His old-school pummeling of the east and south of Ukraine continues, like with this latest attack on the southern city of Kherson. But Ukraine is making slow gains in its counteroffensive, like the claim of a recapture of the village of Robotin, that's in the south of the country. Anastasia Shapochkina. So the narrative we've been fed is that Wagner mercenaries were useful when they needed cannon fodder in places like Bakhmut, but not so much anymore. Is that true?
Wagner had some history in Ukraine, right? That's where they started their existence, 2014. They first went to help out with the reconnaissance missions, then some subversion missions, and then they participated in some shooting down certain, like a military aircraft carrier, a military plane, carrying military Ukrainian military plane. They have been participating in several attacks on the Ukrainian military, but not necessarily. And then eventually dislocated to Syria. Then they expanded their operations. And then the latest we've seen them in Ukraine is when they were actively engaged in military combat, and their numbers have swelled to tens of thousands after they recruited from prisons very actively. However, we cannot say that that was an exclusive privilege of Wagner to use cannon fodder, because that's exactly the same tactics that the Russian army has been using as well with recruits. It's just that, and mobilized personnel, and that's just the numbers of those people were able to be lowered because of the Wagner's contribution of prisoners. But then that has also been that role played. That's exactly when there was already an apogee of Wagner glory, and that's when Prigozhin pretty much lost.
So if I'm being simplistic, now they don't need that cannon fodder from Russian jails as much anymore, because the terrain is mined.
And
they have mines, and
that's one thing. But also, when Wagner was prohibited access to prisons, what we understand was that the Russian Ministry of Defense entered prisons basically and started recruiting itself. It's not because they were done with prisons, because that's a possibility. But another possibility is that it's just basically that great idea could have been exploited by someone else. Indeed, today it is also, we're talking about lines of defense which are very strong, and the waves of cannon fodder aren't used anymore. But we're talking about now counteroffensive. The war is not over, and sending waves of thousands of people has been part of the Russian military tactics for as long as we can remember so far in the 20th century as well.
Claude Blanche-Maison?
Well, Prigozhin has been made a hero of Russia because of the victory in Bakhmut, but that was all for Wagner in Ukraine. After that, they have no other role to play in the war in Ukraine. So they had to be redeployed elsewhere. But then came the coup, and it was a new decision for the redeployment. I would say, seen from Kiev, from Ukraine, part of the battle is, of course, on the front of the 900 kilometers of the front, with the small progress they made those days. But the other front is on the Black Sea. And on the Black Sea, things are moving without making without losing many Ukrainian soldiers. I mean, Ukraine has been sending drones and different missiles also on Crimea, but also on Novorossiysk, the port, new port, much modern port than Sebastopol, and probably much more important, less symbolic but more important from a military point of view and from an economic point of view. So Ukraine is saying, we can do that. We do that with limited armament, because we have limited armament, but be careful, because we can do that in Crimea, but also elsewhere on the Black Sea. And I think they did that without the obvious approval of the Americans. So they are trying to push a little bit on this side. They are sending a second ship with cereals.
It's arrived in Istanbul.
Yes, and it's arrived because it goes along the coast of Romania and Bulgaria in the territorial waters of NATO countries, and Russia can do nothing.
Sergei Girnov, before we go, every country has rivalries between different intelligence services. That's normal. And you heard Lilia Yaparova describe how Wagner may be gone, but there are other groups with other names that'll take its place. Do all the orders come from the Kremlin? Or is there a period where there is a power struggle between these different groups?
There is a power struggle. We name that the struggle between the Kremlin towers. You have FSB, you have military defense ministry, you have external intelligence, SVR, and some other groups of people are behind all these secret services. But for Wagner Group, the disappearance of the Wagner Group from the front of Ukraine is not a very good news to Ukraine, because Prigozhin during 10 months was spending 10 months in injuring and insulting Shoigu and Gerasimov and disorganizing the fight of Russian military. And I think probably for Ukrainians it will be less good to not to have Wagner and Prigozhin on the front.
Anastasia Shapochkina, you agree?
I think it's not going to make much of a difference because, as we have already noted, that indeed the Wagner didn't make much military difference, and the military difference they made were short-lived. Indeed, drawing the inner edge within the Russian military elites was an important role they played. But now I think the death of Prigozhin is going to be drawing such a deeper wedge for so much longer, because now the Russian elites, the good news of Wagner and its demise is that now the Russian elites have such a more important thing to concentrate on than Ukraine, on their priority list. Their own survival is going to be their daily occupation, starting with that of Vladimir Putin himself.
If he's really dead. If he's really dead.
If Prigozhin's really dead.
Yeah. Do you read the declaration of investigative committee of Russian Federation? It was very curious. They said 10 bodies correspond to the list of the passengers to the list of the passengers. He doesn't said Prigozhin, Yevgeny Prigozhin. Do you know that Prigozhin had 3 people? Doubles, administrative doubles. 3 people with passports, Yevgeny Viktorovich Prigozhin. And Prigozhin had 3 passports with another names.
We're out of time, so a straight yes or no. Is that plausible, Lilia Yaparova?
I have to say nope. He's pretty much dead, I believe.
I hope also.
Okay, we'll leave it there for now. I want to thank you so much for joining us, Lilia Yaparova from Vilnius. I want to thank as well Sergei Jirinov, Claude Blanche-Maison, Anastasia Shapochkina. Thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate.